I stood frozen outside their bedroom door as they discussed my decline and the need for professional care. But what declined was their control over my life. Within 48 hours, I'd vanished with my fortune to live the life they thought I was too old to handle. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot as I approached their bedroom door, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in my trembling hands. I had been planning to bring it to my daughter Karen as a peace offering after our argument earlier about my forgetfulness with the stove. But the hushed conversation drifting through the crack in the door stopped me cold. The incident with the stove yesterday was the final straw, Michael. Mom's clearly declining faster than we thought. Karen's voice carried that tone of maternal authority she'd developed since moving me into her house 6 months ago. My son-in-law Michael's response was clinical, detached. The memory care facility on Oakwood has an opening next month. It's expensive, but with her social security and the proceeds from selling her belongings, we should be able to cover the first year. Selling my belongings. They were discussing liquidating my entire life to pay for my imprisonment in a memory care facility, and they hadn't even bothered to include me in the conversation. Dr. Peterson said we should act quickly before she gets worse, Karen continued. Once the dementia progresses, it becomes much harder to get them to cooperate with the transition. Dementia. They thought I had dementia because I'd forgotten to turn off the stove once and misplaced my reading glasses twice in the past month. I was 76 years old, not a vegetable ready for warehousing. But what they said next was what really ignited the fire that would consume their plans. The important thing is to present it as a temporary arrangement, Michael advised with the smugness of someone who thought he was being clever. Tell her it's just for a few weeks while we renovate her room or something. Once she's settled in, she'll forget about coming home anyway. Forget about coming home. They were planning to lie to me, manipulate me into accepting institutional care, and then abandon me there to fade away quietly while they took control of my house, my money, and my life. I feel terrible about this, Karen said, though her tone suggested she felt more inconvenienced than guilty. But we can't keep living on edge, wondering if she's going to burn the house down or wander off in the middle of the night. I had never wandered off anywhere. I had forgotten to turn off a burner once, because I was distracted by a phone call from my doctor about a routine test result. But in Karen's mind, that single moment of normal human forgetfulness had transformed me into a dangerous liability that needed to be professionally managed. It's for her own safety, Michael said, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as Karen. And honestly, it'll be better for everyone. We can visit her on weekends, and she'll have trained professionals taking care of her needs. Trained professionals. Like I was a dangerous animal that required specialized handling rather than a woman who had raised 4 children, managed a household for 50 years, and maintained her independence until 6 months ago, when Karen convinced me to sell my house and move in with them for my own good. The teacup rattled against the saucer in my shaking hands as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. They had been planning this for weeks, possibly months. Every forgotten appointment, every misplaced item, every moment of normal aging had been catalogued as evidence of my incompetence. But as I stood there in the hallway, listening to my own daughter and son-in-law plan my disposal, something crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. If they thought I was too difficult to handle at home, I was about to show them exactly how difficult I could be when I put my mind to it. I crept back to my room as quietly as I had come, my mind already racing with possibilities they couldn't begin to imagine. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, my laptop balanced on my knees, researching everything I had never allowed myself to dream about. Travel packages to Tuscany, river cruises down the Danube, small apartments for rent in Prague and Barcelona, the life I had always wanted to live, but had postponed for responsibilities, for other people's needs, for the comfortable routine of being needed. Well, I wasn't needed anymore. I was a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, a declining asset to be liquidated. So I decided to liquidate myself, but on my own terms. By sunrise, I had made a list that would have impressed any corporate strategist. Step 1. Liquidate all assets quietly and efficiently. Step 2. Establish financial independence outside their reach. Step 3. Disappear before they could execute their nursing home scheme. Step 4. Live the life they thought I was too old and incompetent to handle. But the most satisfying part of my plan was what I wouldn't tell them until it was too late. At 8 in the morning, I called Margaret Thompson, the estate planning attorney who had handled my husband's will 10 years earlier. Margaret, I need to make some urgent changes to my financial arrangements. Can you see me today? Of course, Betty. Is everything all right? Everything is about to be perfect. But I need to move quickly. By 9:30 I was sitting in Margaret's office, explaining my situation with the calm precision of someone who had spent the night planning a military campaign. Betty, are you sure about this? These are irreversible decisions you're talking about. Margaret, my daughter thinks I'm losing my mind because I forgot to turn off the stove once. She's planning to put me in a memory care facility without my consent and sell my belongings to pay for it. Does that sound like the behavior of people who have my best interests at heart? Margaret's expression darkened. They can't force you into a care facility if you're mentally competent, Betty. And from where I'm sitting, you seem completely lucid. I am lucid, which is why I want to make these changes before they try to have me declared incompetent. Can you help me? Absolutely. Let's start with your assets. For the next 2 hours, we systematically restructured my entire financial life. The house that Karen assumed she would inherit was placed into a revocable trust with specific instructions for its sale. My savings accounts were consolidated and transferred to a new bank that Karen and Michael had never heard of. My investment portfolio was moved to a firm in another state. But the piece de resistance was the power of attorney revocation. Betty, this will remove Karen's power of attorney completely. Are you certain you want to do this? Margaret, my daughter is planning to use that power of attorney to commit me to an institution against my will. Yes, I want it revoked immediately. And who would you like to designate as your new power of attorney? I smiled for the first time in months. You, Margaret. Someone who actually listens to what I want instead of deciding what's best for me. By noon, I was legally and financially independent. By 2 o'clock, I had opened a safety deposit box and stored copies of all my new documents, where Karen would never find them. By 4 o'clock, I had visited 3 travel agencies and booked the most ambitious itinerary of my life. But the most important call I made was to Dr. Peterson, Karen's ally in her campaign to have me declared incompetent. Dr. Peterson, this is Betty Morrison. I'd like to schedule a comprehensive cognitive assessment with an independent neurologist. Betty? That's really not necessary. Based on our recent conversations, I think we have a good understanding of your current condition. Doctor, with all due respect, you've spent exactly 15 minutes with me in the past 6 months. I want a complete evaluation from someone who doesn't golf with my son-in-law every Saturday. There was a long pause. I see. Well, if that's what you want, I can refer you to Dr. Elizabeth Chen at the University Medical Center. She specializes in geriatric cognitive assessment. Perfect. Please arrange that for tomorrow morning. And doctor, I'll be bringing my attorney. The pieces were falling into place with satisfying precision. But the most delicious part of my plan was still to come. That evening I sat at dinner with Karen and Michael, listening to them discuss their day while I mentally reviewed my checklist. Financial independence, achieved. Legal protection secured. Medical evaluation scheduled. Escape route, planned. Mom, you seem different tonight, Karen observed. More alert. If only she knew how alert I was. Alert enough to have outmaneuvered her entire scheme in less than 12 hours. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about maybe needing more help around the house, I said carefully. You might be right. Perhaps we should look into some options. Karen and Michael exchanged a look of relief and satisfaction. They thought I was finally accepting their narrative of my decline, agreeing to the solution they had crafted without my input. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Mom. We only want what's best for you. What's best for me? They had used that phrase so many times it had lost all meaning. But tomorrow they would learn what I thought was best for me. And it had nothing to do with memory care facilities or managed decline. It had everything to do with proving that 76 years old was not a diagnosis, and independence was not a luxury I was too old to afford. Dr. Elizabeth Chen was exactly what I had hoped for. Thorough, objective, and refreshingly free of preconceived notions about aging and competence. Her office was filled with natural light and comfortable furniture that invited honest conversation rather than clinical assessment. Mrs. Morrison, your daughter called yesterday, expressing concern about this evaluation. She seems to believe it's unnecessary. My daughter believes many things are unnecessary, doctor, like including me in decisions about my own life. Dr. Chen smiled slightly. Tell me about that. For the next hour, I underwent the most comprehensive cognitive assessment of my life. Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, spatial reasoning challenges, executive function evaluations. Margaret sat beside me, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated exactly why I had chosen her as my new advocate. But the moment that changed everything was when Dr. Chen asked about my recent incidents of forgetfulness. "Mrs. Morrison, can you walk me through what happened with the stove incident that your daughter mentioned?" I was preparing dinner when my doctor called with results from my mammogram. I was so relieved to hear the results were normal that I forgot to turn off the burner under the green beans. When I remembered 20 minutes later they had boiled dry. No fire, no smoke, just overcooked vegetables. And this was characterized as a serious safety incident. According to my daughter, it was evidence of dangerous cognitive decline that required immediate professional intervention. Dr. Chen made notes in my file. "Mrs. Morrison, in my professional opinion, what you've described is a normal reaction to receiving potentially stressful medical news. The fact that you remembered to check the stove at all demonstrates appropriate safety awareness." Margaret leaned forward. "Doctor, what would you consider a concerning pattern of behavior that might indicate cognitive decline?" "Repeated incidents of dangerous behavior, inability to learn from mistakes, confusion about basic safety concepts, or failure to recognize the incidents occurred at all. Mrs. Morrison demonstrates none of these characteristics." The written report that Dr. Chen provided was a masterpiece of professional vindication. "Patient demonstrates excellent cognitive function for her age, with no signs of dementia, significant memory impairment, or safety concerns. Patient is fully capable of independent living and autonomous decision-making." But the real victory was yet to come. That afternoon I returned home to find Karen and Michael waiting in the living room with what looked suspiciously like brochures for memory care facilities spread across the coffee table. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation about your future," Karen began with the tone of someone about to deliver unpleasant, but necessary news. "You're absolutely right, Karen. We do need to talk about my future. But first, I have something to show you." I handed her Dr. Chen's report and watched her expression change from confident authority to confused concern as she read. "Mom, this says you're completely competent, but Dr. Peterson said." Dr. Peterson spent 15 minutes with me and made assumptions based on one incident with overcooked vegetables. Dr. Chen spent 3 hours conducting comprehensive testing. Which evaluation do you think is more reliable? Michael took the report from Karen and read it with the expression of someone watching his carefully laid plans collapse. "Betty, this doesn't change the fact that living independently is becoming difficult for you." "You're right, Michael. Living independently was becoming difficult. Past tense, because I'm no longer planning to live independently." They both looked relieved until I continued. "I'm planning to live adventurously." But what I revealed next was what really stunned them into silence. I pulled out a folder containing my travel itinerary, bank transfer confirmations, and legal documents. "I'm leaving for Europe next week. I've booked a 6-month tour through Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal. After that, I'm considering Australia and New Zealand." Karen's face went white. "Mom, you can't be serious. You can't just travel the world at your age." "Why not?" "Dr. Chen says I'm completely competent. My financial advisor says I have sufficient funds. My travel agent says I'm their most enthusiastic client this year. But what about safety? What about medical care? What about the nursing home you were planning to put me in without my consent?" The silence that followed was deafening. They hadn't realized I knew about their plan, and now their carefully constructed narrative about my incompetence was crumbling around them. "Mom, how did you—" "I overheard you discussing my decline and the need for professional care. I heard you planning to lie to me about it being temporary. I heard you calculating how to sell my belongings to pay for my imprisonment." Michael's face flushed red. "Betty, we were trying to protect you." "No, Michael, you were trying to control me. There's a difference." Karen was crying now, but I couldn't tell if it was from guilt or frustration. "Mom, we can't let you do this. It's not safe." "Karen, according to the power of attorney you had me sign, you could have prevented this. Unfortunately for your plans, I revoked that power of attorney yesterday." The horror on their faces was almost comical. They had built their entire scheme around their legal authority to make decisions for me, and I had just pulled that foundation out from under them. But the final blow was still coming. The week that followed was a masterclass in strategic positioning. Every day brought new revelations that demonstrated exactly how thoroughly I had outmaneuvered their plans. Every conversation revealed another layer of their assumptions that had been systematically dismantled. Karen tried legal intervention first. Mom, I spoke to a lawyer about having your competency evaluated again. There has to be something wrong with Dr. Chen's assessment. Karen, you're welcome to pursue that, but you should know that Margaret Thompson is now my attorney of record, and she's quite familiar with elder abuse laws, including the illegal confinement of competent adults. Michael attempted financial sabotage next. Betty, your bank called about some unusual large transactions. I think someone might be taking advantage of you. You're right, Michael. Someone was taking advantage of me. But I took care of that problem by moving my accounts to a bank that doesn't consider my son-in-law an authorized contact. They tried emotional manipulation, enlisting my other children to call and express concern about my sudden behavioral changes. But my responses were consistently calm and rational, demonstrating exactly the kind of stable judgment they claimed I lacked. But the moment that truly broke their spirit was when I showed them my new living will. Mom, what is this document? Karen asked, staring at the papers. Margaret had prepared. It's my advance directive, updated to reflect my current wishes. Most importantly, it specifically prohibits placement in any care facility against my will, and it designates Margaret as my healthcare proxy. You can't do this. Actually, I can, and I have. Dr. Chen's evaluation confirms that I'm fully competent to make these decisions, and Margaret has ensured they're legally bulletproof. The beautiful irony was that their own plan had provided me with the perfect escape route. They had been so focused on proving my incompetence that they had given me months to observe their tactics and prepare countermeasures. But what happened on my departure day was what made the entire adventure worthwhile. I had arranged for a car service to pick me up at 6 in the morning. Early enough to avoid a dramatic confrontation, but late enough to ensure Karen and Michael knew I was leaving. My luggage was packed with clothes for every climate, medications for every contingency, and documents proving my independence. As I waited in the foyer with my suitcases, Karen appeared at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe, her face a mixture of defeat and desperate concern. Mom, please don't do this. What if something happens to you? What if you get sick or lost or… Karen, what if I don't? What if I have the most amazing 6 months of my life? What if I prove that 76 is not too old for adventure? But why does it have to be so extreme? Why can't you just travel closer to home? I looked at my daughter, this woman who had convinced herself that managing my decline was an act of love, and felt a mixture of sadness and liberation. Because, sweetheart, you taught me that half measures don't work. You didn't plan to put me in a nursing home for a few weeks. You planned to put me there permanently. So I'm not going to travel for a few weeks. I'm going to travel until I've proven that your assumptions about my limitations were completely wrong. The car arrived exactly on schedule. As the driver loaded my luggage, I handed Karen an envelope. What's this? My itinerary for the first month. After that, I'll send postcards. Michael appeared beside Karen, both of them watching helplessly as I prepared to board the car that would take me to the airport and the life they thought I was too old to live. Betty, at least give us your hotel information so we can reach you in case of emergency. Margaret has all my contact information. If there's a genuine emergency, she'll know how to reach me. But what I said next was what finally made them understand the full scope of their miscalculation. Karen, Michael, you spent months planning to take control of my life because you decided I was no longer capable of making good decisions. So I made the biggest decision of my life, without asking your permission or requiring your approval. I liquidated my entire estate, revoked your authority over my affairs, and planned an international adventure that will cost more money than your nursing home scheme would have saved. Their faces registered the full impact of what I'd accomplished. Not only had I escaped their control, I had done it with such thoroughness and strategic thinking that it demolished every argument they had made about my declining competence. If I'm really suffering from cognitive decline, I continued, how did I manage to outmaneuver both of you so completely? The car door closed behind me with the satisfying finality of a chess game ending in checkmate. Through the window I watched Karen and Michael standing in their driveway, still in their bathrobes, watching their assumptions about aging and control disappear down the street in a black sedan. As we drove toward the airport, I opened my travel journal to the first page and wrote, Day 1, proving that the only thing declining about me is my tolerance for other people's limitations. The adventure was about to begin. 6 months later, I was sitting at a cafe in Barcelona, writing postcards and reviewing the photo album that documented every moment of my dangerous solo journey through Europe. The evidence was overwhelming. I was not only surviving my adventure, I was thriving in ways that would have been impossible in the memory care facility Karen and Michael had selected for me. The photos told the story better than words ever could. Betty in Florence, standing in front of Michelangelo's David, with a tour group of other seniors who had rejected society's expectations about aging gracefully in rocking chairs. Betty in Paris, navigating the metro system with the confidence of someone who had quickly learned that being underestimated was often an advantage. Betty in Madrid, flamenco dancing with a partner who was impressed by her grace rather than concerned about her decline. But the most satisfying photo was the one I'd taken in Rome, standing in front of the Trevi fountain, with my phone displaying a bank balance that proved how wrong they'd been about my financial judgment. My travel expenses were exactly what I'd budgeted, my health was better than it had been in years, and my mind was sharper than ever thanks to the constant stimulation of new places, languages, and experiences. Every day brought challenges that required problem-solving, adaptation, and learning, exactly the kind of mental exercise that prevents actual cognitive decline. The phone calls from home had evolved from panicked to grudging to something approaching admiration. Karen's voice had lost its tone of maternal authority and taken on the uncertain quality of someone who was beginning to realize she might have been wrong about everything. "Mom, your postcards are incredible. You look different." "I look happy, Karen. It's what happens when you're living the life you choose instead of the one other people think you should have." "I can see that. And I have to admit, your travel blog has gotten quite a following. People are calling you an inspiration." The travel blog had been Margaret's suggestion. "Betty, you should document this journey. Show the world what 76 looks like when it's lived on your own terms." The response had been overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from other older adults who had been inspired to reconsider their own assumptions about age and adventure. But the conversation that really vindicated my decision was the one I had with Dr. Chen during a video call from my hotel in Seville.
"Mrs. Morrison, I have to say, this journey of yours has been fascinating to follow. How are you feeling about the experience?"
"Dr. Chen, I feel more mentally sharp and physically capable than I have in years. Navigating foreign cities, learning basic phrases in 4 languages, managing logistics across 6 countries, these challenges have been the best cognitive therapy I could have imagined." That's exactly what I would have predicted. The research is clear that novel experiences and complex problem-solving are among the best ways to maintain cognitive function as we age. It's ironic, isn't it? My daughter wanted to put me in a facility to prevent cognitive decline, but this adventure has probably done more to preserve my mental acuity than any medical intervention could have. Mrs. Morrison, you've essentially created your own therapeutic program that addresses every factor we know contributes to healthy aging: physical activity, social engagement, intellectual stimulation, sense of purpose, and autonomy over your daily life. The conversation was being recorded for a research project Dr. Chen was conducting on non-traditional approaches to healthy aging. My adventure was becoming a case study in the power of self-determination for older adults. But what happened next was what made the entire journey worthwhile. I received an email from Michael that began with words I never thought I'd see. "Betty, we owe you an apology." The message continued. "Watching your journey through your blog and photos has forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our assumptions regarding aging and capability. We convinced ourselves we were protecting you, but we were actually trying to control you because we were afraid of losing you. Instead, our efforts to manage your life nearly cost us the relationship entirely." Karen's separate email was even more revealing. "Mom, I realize now that I was projecting my own fears about aging onto you. Watching you navigate Europe with such confidence and joy has shown me that competence isn't about avoiding all risks. It's about making informed choices and accepting responsibility for the consequences. You've made better decisions about your life in the past 6 months than we made about your life in the entire year before you left." The transformation in our family dynamic was visible in every subsequent conversation. They stopped asking if I was being safe and started asking about my plans for the next leg of my journey. They stopped expressing concern about my limitations and started expressing admiration for my resourcefulness. But the most important change was in how they talked about their own futures. "Mom, watching you has made me realize that I've been living my life as if it's going to end at 65, Karen admitted during one of our video calls. "You've shown me that age is just a number, and that the most important factor in how we experience aging is our attitude toward possibility." Michael had started planning adventures of his own. "Betty, You've inspired us to book a trip to Costa Rica for our anniversary. We realized we've been postponing travel until someday without recognizing that someday needs to be scheduled, not just hoped for. The ripple effects of my escape were spreading through my entire family, challenging everyone to reconsider their assumptions about aging, capability, and the relationship between safety and vitality. As I sat in that Barcelona cafe, planning the next phase of my journey, I reflected on how completely the situation had reversed. Instead of being managed by people who thought they knew what was best for me, I had become an inspiration to people who were learning what was possible for themselves. The nursing home brochures that Karen and Michael had spread across their coffee table 6 months earlier were gathering dust in a drawer somewhere, replaced by travel magazines and adventure vacation packages. My decline had become their awakening. 18 months after leaving that morning in the hired car, I returned home to a family that barely resembled the one I'd left behind. The woman who walked off the plane at the airport was tanned, confident, and carrying a passport stamped with evidence of adventures across 4 continents. But the most dramatic transformation wasn't in me. It was in the people waiting to greet me. Karen and Michael stood at the arrival gate with expressions of genuine respect and what looked suspiciously like envy. Gone was the patronizing concern that had characterized their behavior before my departure. In its place was the kind of admiration usually reserved for returning heroes. "Mom, you look incredible," Karen said, embracing me with an enthusiasm that felt completely different from the careful, managing hugs I remembered. "Your photos don't do justice to how alive you look." Michael was studying me with the expression of someone trying to reconcile his expectations with reality. "Betty, we have so much to apologize for, and so much to learn from you." The drive to their house, my temporary landing pad while I decided on my next permanent residence, was filled with questions about my adventures rather than concerns about my health. They wanted to know about the cooking classes in Tuscany, the language immersion program in Barcelona, the hiking expedition in New Zealand, and the volunteer work I'd done at an elephant sanctuary in India. But what truly demonstrated how much had changed was the conversation we had that first evening. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened before you left," Karen began, but her tone was completely different from the authoritative lectures I remembered. "We've had 18 months to think about our behavior, and we're horrified by what we tried to do. We convinced ourselves we were acting out of love," Michael added, "but we were actually acting out of fear and control. Watching your journey has forced us to confront some ugly truths about how we view aging and autonomy." I sat back in the chair that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like a temporary rest stop, and looked at these 2 people who had learned what I'd hoped they would learn, that capability isn't determined by age, and safety isn't achieved through control. "What specifically have you learned?" I asked, genuinely curious about their transformation. Karen's answer was more thoughtful than I'd expected. "I learned that I was trying to manage your life the same way I managed my children's lives, by anticipating problems and preventing them from happening. But you're not a child, and the problems I was trying to prevent weren't actually problems at all. And I learned that competence isn't about avoiding all risks," Michael continued. "It's about making informed decisions and taking responsibility for the consequences. Your journey proved that you're fully capable of both." But the most significant revelation came when Karen shared what my adventure had inspired in their own lives. "Mom, watching you live so fearlessly has changed how we approach our own lives. We've started taking risks we would never have considered before. Michael and I went ziplining in Costa Rica, something we would have called too dangerous for people our age just 2 years ago. And we've stopped using age as an excuse for not pursuing dreams," Michael added. "Karen's started taking art classes she's wanted to take for 20 years, and I'm learning Spanish so we can volunteer abroad next summer." The transformation was remarkable. Instead of spending their energy managing other people's lives, they were investing in expanding their own. Instead of viewing aging as a process of gradual limitation, they were embracing it as an opportunity for continued growth and adventure. But what happened next was what made my entire journey worthwhile. Over dinner, Karen pulled out a folder filled with legal documents. "Mom, we've made some changes to our own estate planning. We've established living wills that specifically prohibit anyone from making decisions about our care based on age alone. We've designated advocates who understand that competence should be measured by actual capability, not chronological age. We've also started a foundation," Michael added, "the Morrison Foundation for Active Aging. We're funding programs that challenge stereotypes about older adults and support non-traditional approaches to healthy aging. I was speechless. My escape from their control had inspired them to protect future generations from similar control. My rebellion against their assumptions about aging had evolved into a mission to change those assumptions for others. The Foundation's first project is funding travel scholarships for older adults who want to pursue adventures but can't afford them. Karen explained. We're calling it the Betty Morrison Scholarship Fund for Fearless Living. The irony was perfect. The woman they'd tried to put in a nursing home had become the inspiration for a program that would fund adventures for people society deemed too old for adventure. But the most emotional moment came when Karen handed me a letter. Mom, this is from the Oakwood Memory Care Facility, the place we were planning to put you. They asked us to share it with you. The letter was from the facility director, Mrs. Morrison. Your story has become legendary among our staff. We've used your journey as a teaching tool to help our employees recognize the difference between necessary care and unnecessary control. Your example has inspired us to completely restructure our approach to resident autonomy and decision-making. Thank you for showing us that age is not a diagnosis and that competence should never be assumed based on chronological years alone. The nursing home that was supposed to be my prison had become an advocate for the principles I'd fought to establish, that older adults deserve respect, autonomy, and the presumption of competence until proven otherwise. As I sat in their living room that night, looking through photo albums from my 18-month adventure, I realized that my escape had accomplished something far more significant than proving my own capability. It had inspired a fundamental shift in how my family, and apparently many others, thought about aging, autonomy, and the relationship between safety and vitality. The woman who had stood frozen outside their bedroom door 18 months earlier, listening to them plan her disposal, had returned as an inspiration for active aging and autonomous living. The decline they'd diagnosed had become the catalyst for a movement that challenged everything they'd believed about growing older. Karen and Michael had learned that the best way to honor someone you love isn't to manage their limitations, it's to support their possibilities. And I had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to other people's assumptions about your capabilities is to exceed those assumptions so dramatically that they're forced to question everything they thought they knew about what's possible. That night, as I fell asleep in the guest room of a house that no longer felt like a prison, I was already planning my next adventure. Because the most important thing I'd learned during my 18 months of proving my competence was that adventures don't have expiration dates. They just require the courage to begin and the wisdom to ignore anyone who says you're too old to live the life you choose. My children had tried to end my story with a nursing home. Instead, they'd given me the motivation to write the most exciting chapters of my life. And the story was far from over. The next morning, I would start planning my next journey, this time with their full support and enthusiastic encouragement. Because sometimes the best gift you can give people who love you is showing them that their fears about your limitations are smaller than your capacity for surprising them. The nursing home brochures had been replaced by travel magazines. The power of attorney had been replaced by the power of inspiration. And the woman they'd tried to warehouse had become the woman they most wanted to become. Some stories end with acceptance. The best ones end with transformation. And this story was just beginning.